Okay, so let's unpack this. We are dedicating this deep dive to a figure whose career just, I mean, it completely shatters all conventional wisdom about success,
Especially in tech, right?
especially in the cutthroat world of global technology.
Yeah.
We're talking about Jack Ma, or Ma Yun,
Mm.
a man who consistently failed the systems
Mm.
designed to measure, intelligence and success, only to build an empire that literally shaped the global economy.
What's so fascinating here, I think, is that his biography isn't really a corporate history. It's more of a testament to this radical, almost impossible tenacity.
Yes.
We're tracking the journey of a personality who thrived because of his failures, not despite them. He leveraged a complete lack of technical qualifications into this unique, people-centric leadership style.
Absolutely. And when
Yeah.
you look at the sheer volume of material we have, the narrative that just keeps popping up is rejection. Constant rejection.
Right.
And we have to start with the most famous one, the one that, it defines his underdog status before he ever became a tech titan.
You're talking about the KFC story.
Of course.
Yeah, this is crucial for setting the stage. When KFC first opened a location in his hometown, Hangzhou, 24 people applied for jobs.
Wait.
23 of them were accepted. Ma Yun was the single solitary rejection.
Just imagine that. Being the one person deemed unsuitable out of 24 applicants. It's brutal.
And the reason that's always cited, which has become part of the lore, was just it was so blunt.
Too skinny, too short, and in general protruded a bad physical appearance. I mean, this wasn't about skills. It was a rejection of his very presence.
That kind of constant stinging failure is really the furnace where his later success was forged.
Exactly. Being continually dismissed by traditional gatekeepers becomes the core of his later philosophy.
So for you, the listener, this deep dive is really a mission to synthesize these two conflicting forces.
You have Ma's highly unlikely path, right?
Yeah.
Built on soft skills and this global vision.
And then you have the massive, very public clash with powerful Chinese financial regulators that forced his strategic retreat.
And ultimately, we'll analyze what his reemergence in, of all things, agriculture and education, tells us about the limits of private power in China today.
To understand the man who dared to challenge the state, you really have to start at the beginning.
Right, in the crucible of those early failures, because they absolutely shaped his later tolerance for risk and, well, for rejection.
Indeed. So let's go back to Hangzhou, 1964. Born Ma Yun. His early life was defined by this one almost obsessive interest,
English.
English. And it wasn't a subject he was just good at in school. It was a skill he actively went out and pursued in the real world.
And the dedication was just staggering. We know he started practicing with foreign tourists near the Hangzhou International Hotel when he was still pretty young.
But it was the consistency that underscores his commitment. It became this dedicated, self-imposed training regimen.
For 9 years.
9 years, every single day, Ma rode his bicycle 27 kilometers, that's about 17 miles, just to get to the hotel area.
And he wasn't getting paid.
No, he worked as an impromptu, self-appointed tour guide. He offered free tours just for the chance to speak English and get fluent.
That is incredible dedication for a young person.
Really?
It wasn't about textbook grammar, It was about immediate, practical, conversational application.
Exactly. He wanted the real cultural exchange. And it was during this 9-year ritual that he met a foreign pen pal who struggled to pronounce his Chinese name.
And she gave him the name Jag to Jack.
Right. And this intense self-taught focus on communication, on bridging cultural divides, that would become his greatest asset in global business, far more than any technical skill he lacked.
But while he's busy mastering this informal global language, his formal academic life was, well, a train wreck.
A total mess.
The materials clearly show a personality who just did not fit the rigid, standardized structure of the Chinese education system.
Especially when it came to core subjects like math. His school records paint this highly paradoxical picture. In primary school, he struggled. He was even forced to transfer schools because he was fighting a lot. It shows this restless spirit that just chafed against the rules.
But the real systemic failure, the big one, came with the Gaokao.
The intensely competitive, highly unforgiving Chinese college entrance examination.
This exam is the ultimate gatekeeper in China. I mean, failing it can define your entire life path. And he failed it.
Not once,
Not twice.
but 3 times in a row.
And the margin of failure was,
Yeah.
it was devastating. His first attempt in 1982 yielded only 1 point in mathematics.
1. A single point. Think about the psychological weight of that. It's almost a perfect failure.
It speaks volumes about his character that he came back the next year, 1983, only to manage an equally abysmal math score of 19 points.
I mean, this is relentless, public, institutionalized failure. Most people would have just quit. They'd have resigned themselves to a different, less ambitious path.
But not Ma. He comes back for a third try in 1984. He finally scores 89 points in math.
Which is a huge leap. It shows incredible effort.
It is, but even that massive improvement was still 5 points below the minimum benchmark required for university acceptance.
The willpower was there, but the system still said no.
So if he was 5 points shy, how did he even get into higher education at all? This is the kind of lucky break that only happens to people who just refuse to quit.
It was a bureaucratic loophole that opened the door for him. He was only accepted into Hangzhou Normal University because the English department...
His area of strength.
Right. His area of strength hadn't met its minimum enrollment quota. They basically had to lower the bar out of necessity to fill seats.
So he benefited from the system's failure to recruit. That's a powerful reversal of fortune. He was promoted into the foreign language major, not because he met the standard, but because they needed him.
And once he was in his element, those 9 years of informal English practice paid off immediately. He thrived.
He went from being an academic outcast to one of the top students in his department. He became chairman of the student union, then the Hangzhou Federation of Students.
He knew how to lead and communicate. He just couldn't solve quadratic equations.
And that distinction is the central paradox of his entire career. The ability to excel at soft skills communication, leadership, vision, while failing utterly at the hard skills like math and coding.
So he gets his BA in English in 1988, takes a pretty comfortable job as a lecturer at a university, but the rejections weren't over.
No, not by a long shot. The real world was just as unforgiving as the Gaokao. The sources say he applied for 31 different entry-level jobs.
And was rejected from every single one. That is an almost unimaginable emotional toll. 31 doors slammed shut.
The KFC incident is just the most famous of those 31.
So the takeaway is that this relentless pattern of failure just created the blueprint for his risk tolerance. If you already failed 31 times and scored a 1 in math, what's one more failure?
Right. But amidst all this localized failure in China, there was this one crucial international connection that fundamentally rewired his worldview.
The Morley family in Australia.
This often gets glossed over. But Ma himself calls this experience crucial, and it really provides the philosophical foundation for Alibaba's global scope.
Yeah, in 1980, while he was practicing English, he befriended Ken Morley, who was visiting China. Years later, the Morleys hosted Ma in Newcastle, Australia.
For 29 days. And Ma later reflected, without those 29 days, I would never have been able to think the way I do today.
Think about what that trip meant. Ma was coming from this highly rigid, often culturally isolated China. Suddenly, he's immersed for a month in a Western, democratic, capitalist society.
He saw a different way of thinking, a different approach to problem solving.
A different sense of personal freedom. That experience gave him a non-Chinese worldview, a global lens that was absolutely essential for building a truly international e-commerce platform years later.
He developed the tenacity back home, but the Morley connection gave him the global vision. That shift is the key inflection point before technology ever even enters the picture.
He returns to China, and in 1994, he starts his first small business, a translation agency. But the real turning point comes the very next year, 1995.
The trip to the U.S.
Yes, on behalf of the Hangzhou municipal government. And that trip introduced him to the nascent world of the internet.
And the discovery moment is legendary because it so perfectly highlights the information asymmetry that existed between China and the rest of the world at that time.
The anecdote is a perfect case study in recognizing a market void. He searched for beer online. He found results for Germany, the U.S., Japan, but nothing for China. Then he searched for just general information about China.
And found basically nothing.
An information void. China was globally invisible online, and that void provided immediate, urgent market validation. Ma and a friend quickly created a very basic website. Ma called it Ugly, about Chinese beer.
And the speed of the response tells the entire story.
They launched the site at 9:40 in the morning.
And by 12:30 p.m.,
That same day, he had received emails from prospective investors.
within hours, the demand was just there, hiding beneath the surface. He recalled waiting 3.5 hours for half a page to load on a slow dial-up connection. But he was so proud, he said, I proved the internet existed.
That realization led to his second company, Hangzhou Hope Computer Services, in 1995. It was one of China's earliest internet startups, basically an online yellow pages called China Pages.
And this wasn't some slow burn venture. China Pages made about 5 million RMB in profit within 3 years. He had found his area of dominance using communication and vision to bridge that massive information gap.
He then did a brief stint working for the Ministry of Foreign Trade, but he realized the bureaucracy was just stifling. He needed to go bigger, faster, and outside the direct control of the state.
And that's when the real idea of the global platform was born.
He quits the ministry, goes back to Hangzhou in 1999, and co-founds the Alibaba Group in his apartment with 18 friends.
The 18 Luans, starting with a very modest seed capital of 500,000 yuans.
This was the pivotal pivot, a B2B platform focused on small and medium-sized enterprises, helping them connect with international buyers. And crucially, he quickly secured substantial foreign venture capital.
A total of $25 million from two titans, Goldman Sachs and SoftBank, between late 99 and early 2000.
Getting that kind of foreign capital was an enormous vote of confidence in his ability to sell the future of Chinese e-commerce to the world.
It signaled that global investors trusted his vision, even if local bankers were, still wary.
And his initial mission was perfect for the moment: foster the growth of Chinese SMEs and build a global platform just ahead of China's entrance into the WTO in 2001.
Alibaba became profitable just 3 years later, rapidly expanding the ecosystem to include Taobao, Alipay, Tmall, and so many others.
We have to talk about that expansion because the speed was breathtaking. And one of the most important strategic moments was his handling of the confrontation with the American giant, eBay.
Yes, this was a battle for the soul of Chinese e-commerce.
eBay offered to buy Taobao, Alibaba's consumer-to-consumer platform. They wanted to integrate it and just dominate the market.
But Ma rejected the offer. He knew that giving up control would mean surrendering the future.
Instead of selling out, he secured a massive war chest, a $1 billion investment from Yahoo co-founder Jerry Yang.
Yang believed in an independent future for Taobao, just like Ma did. That decision secured Alibaba's autonomy and allowed them to eventually defeat eBay in the Chinese market.
That strategic victory proved he wasn't just a visionary. He was a master strategist, willing to take massive risks.
The empire he built reached an almost incomprehensible scale. By November 2012, Alibaba's online transaction volume exceeded 1 trillion yuan.
And then the 2014 NYSE IPO raised over $25 billion, a global record at the time.
That IPO cemented him as a global financial force, and it really brought his unique leadership style into focus. We also see his commitment to a kind of social strategy emerge here.
Absolutely. Starting in 2010, Ma announced Alibaba would earmark 0.3% of its annual revenue for environmental protection, focusing on water and air quality. He was articulating a commitment that went beyond just profit margins.
So let's get back to that core paradox, because this is where the deep dive truly begins. It raises the most important question. How did a man who struggled so profoundly with math, a man trained in English literature, successfully run and scale a world-leading high-technology conglomerate?
Ma's profile just stands in such sharp contrast to most tech moguls in China and really globally. They almost all have deep backgrounds in computer science or engineering.
He had a complete dearth of technical expertise. He wasn't equipped in the traditional sense to run a tech giant.
And he didn't hide it. In a 2010 public statement, he revealed he had never written a single line of computer code.
And he only got a personal computer for business use at age 33, long after he'd already founded China Pages.
So his role could never be technical. His genius was entirely in organizational capacity and soft skills. He understood how to hire the right technical people and, crucially, how to motivate them with a compelling vision.
He was the ultimate promoter, the chief salesman, the manager, the organizer.
It's classic liberal arts leadership, right? Applying an understanding of human behavior and storytelling to a technical challenge. He had a famous philosophy: I hire people smarter than me, but I lead them.
He specifically sought out technical specialists who were far more capable than he was. His job was to manage the politics, manage the capital, and keep the team focused on the customer, not on the technological minutiae.
It's the vision casting that matters at that scale, not the coding ability. He focused on the why helping small businesses thrive, which resonated globally and allowed him to attract top talent who would handle the how.
That skill allowed him to operate on a global stage, leading to meetings like the one he had with then President-elect Donald Trump in 2017.
Right, where he discussed creating 1 million jobs in the U.S. It underscored his status as China's most powerful and charismatic global business ambassador.
But this entire arc, this narrative of impossible charismatic success, it crashed violently into the reality of state power in late 2020.
The state was fundamentally uncomfortable with the breadth and depth of the influence he'd accumulated.
And the catalyst for that crash was a single critical speech. October 2020 at the People's Bank of China Financial Markets Forum in Shanghai.
Ma, ever the provocative personality, decided to critique the very financial structures that had allowed his company, Ant Group, to reach this unprecedented valuation.
He launched a very public, very controversial broadside against China's established financial institutions.
He criticized state banks for having what he called a pawn shop mentality.
Meaning they prioritized collateral and minimizing risk over supporting innovation or helping small businesses.
And he didn't stop there. He took aim at global banking standards, dismissing the International Basel Accords as a club for the elderly.
Which was a profound public challenge to the very foundation of global financial stability as regulators understand it.
He was essentially arguing that traditional finance was too slow for the digital age, and that Ant Group was the superior, more efficient model.
This was seen not just as a critique, but as a direct challenge to the authority of China's financial leadership, coming just days before Ant Group's highly anticipated $37 billion IPO.
The response was immediate, calculated, and absolute. On November 3rd, 2020, just days before the scheduled debut, the Shanghai Stock Exchange halted the IPO.
A clear, unmissable signal of the state's ultimate authority.
And we have to look at the regulator's perspective here. Ant Group was seeking a tech company valuation, which is always very high,
But about 90% of its revenue actually came from financial services, like microlending.
Exactly. This is where the shadow banking risk comes in. Ant was acting like a gigantic bank, but without the same strict capital requirements that state-owned banks faced.
The People's Bank of China had been trying to regulate Ant as a financial holding company since 2018.
Which would have required them to hold more capital, massively depressing their profitability and their valuation. Regulators feared a financial bubble. The action was designed to impose stability.
And the scrutiny didn't stop with Ant Group. This intervention quickly broadened into a much wider government crackdown. It targeted the bad giants, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent.
Ma's outspokenness provided the convenient justification for accelerating what was probably an inevitable systemic correction.
And the personal fallout for Ma was dramatic.
He effectively vanished from public life from October 2020 to January 2021. This generated immense international speculation about his safety, his political standing,
And the very future of private entrepreneurship in China.
His first reappearance was precisely calculated. In January 2021, he spoke via video link to rural teachers at a charity event.
Signaling he was alive, well, and focusing his energy on philanthropy and education-safe areas, encouraged by the state.
But this was not a quick blip. It was a strategic, mandated retreat. By 2022, Ma had moved to Tokyo, Japan, largely retreating from the public spotlight.
And in May 2023, he accepted a highly surprising academic position as an invited professor at Tokyo College.
And his academic focus was perhaps the most jarring shift of all.
Sustainable agriculture and food production.
It's a massive, highly symbolic change. From the glittering, high-risk world of fintech into the quiet, grounding work of food systems research, it speaks to a conscious decision to move away from high-tension sectors.
His eventual return to China was also carefully orchestrated. In March 2023, he was seen touring a school in Hangzhou. Reports suggested he was personally persuaded to return by Premier Li Cheng,
indicating that the state was facilitating and thus controlling his reentry. But that return was absolutely conditioned on a fundamental shift in his power.
This is the critical institutional change. In January 2023, Ant Group announced major changes in shareholder voting rights.
The most significant change was the dramatic reduction of Ma's voting rights, which shrank from nearly 50% down to just 6%.
He was effectively neutered as the ultimate decision-maker. This change ensured no single shareholder could retain a controlling stake.
The Chinese government reacted very positively, noting improvements in transparency. The message was clear. Entrepreneurship is fine, but personal power that challenges state authority is not.
Ma also engineered a massive structural change at Alibaba itself, turning it into a holding company and separating its subsidiaries into 6 independent firms.
A proactive move to satisfy the state's demand for decentralization and reduce the systemic risk of one gigantic entity.
And we've seen the slow, cautious process of his conditional reemergence continue. In early 2024, he actually replaced SoftBank as Alibaba's largest single shareholder.
Reasserting financial commitment while maintaining his now reduced influence. And then in February 2025, he attended a high-level symposium hosted by President Xi Jinping himself.
On the surface, that sounds like full rehabilitation.
It sounds like it, but the state media coverage is where the detail lies. While his image appeared on TV, state-run media outlets, like Xinhua, conspicuously omitted his name entirely from the list of attendees.
The definition of conditional acceptance. He's allowed to be present to signal compliance, but his personal celebrity status remains severely curtailed.
He is an accepted, compliant figure, but no longer the independent global voice he once was.
That's a perfect pivot point, because now we have to look at the man's philosophy, which is just as paradoxical as his career.
Ma has long positioned himself as a thinker rooted in Chinese tradition, identifying as an adherent of both Buddhism and Taoism.
But he's also not shy about discussing other cultures. In 2014, he attributed American society's foundational strength to its Christian cultural heritage, and stressed the need for China to implement its own positive values system post-Cultural Revolution.
And then there was the surprising revelation in 2018 when the People's Daily identified him as a member of the Chinese Communist Party. For many international observers, that was a shock.
It really clarifies his position within the system, even if he doesn't align with every policy.
And let's talk about his most controversial domestic view, his endorsement of the 996 working hours system.
Working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week.
He didn't just endorse it, he defended it, calling it a huge blessing necessary for young people to achieve success. It garnered significant criticism, but it reflects the intense mindset in China's tech culture.
It's a brutal demand on the present, but it's dramatically contradicted by his utopian future predictions about AI.
Right. He balances that sacrifice with this optimistic vision. He suggested AI would lead to a life of greater leisure with 4-hour workdays, 3 days a week.
He was also skeptical that AI could ever truly replace humans in key areas.
He argued that true success requires a love quotient, a blend of emotional capacity, vision, and empathy that machines lack.
And his views on state planning are highly provocative. In 2017, he made a stunning claim advocating for using big data and AI to implement elements of a planned economy.
He argued that historical models failed because of information gaps. He proposed that the perfect real-time information from big data could theoretically make central planning effective.
A very appealing idea for Beijing.
Finally, his philanthropic footprint is enormous. It provides a massive global platform for him outside of finance. He founded the Jack Ma Foundation, focused on education, the environment, and public health.
His commitment to the environment is particularly long-standing. He became chairman of the Nature Conservancy's China Program Board the day after he stepped down as Alibaba CEO.
And his philanthropic reach is truly global. We saw it during the Sichuan earthquake, the Nepal earthquake.
And especially during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Jack Ma Foundation became one of the most visible global philanthropic forces, donating massive quantities of medical supplies everywhere.
It's a public role that is beneficial to the state, globally recognized, yet safely distanced from the volatile finance sector.
So what does this extraordinary paradoxical journey mean for you, the learner? We've traced Ma's arc from a rejected English teacher who leveraged sheer will and soft skills to build an empire,
to the mogul who publicly challenged the state's financial regime, paid a dramatic price, and was ultimately forced into this strategic retreat focused on sustainable agriculture.
Ma's story underscores two critical, enduring lessons. First, vision and charisma can fundamentally outweigh technical expertise when scaling a global company.
And second, it highlights the permanent structural tension in the Chinese system, the conflict between massive private innovation and the state's demand for absolute control.
His return, with dramatically reduced influence, going from 50% voting rights to just 6% in Ant Group, establishes the new, careful equilibrium required for any large enterprise in China today.
His trajectory teaches us that the highest ceiling of private financial success is always capped by political authority. He achieved the highest level of celebrity entrepreneurship, but the state successfully mandated his retreat.
Which brings us back to the present and his strange new academic path. You now know the intricate details of this man, given his recent focus on sustainable agriculture and considering his initial world-changing success came from spotting a global information gap about China online. What new global information gap might Ma be preparing to fill?
Is this a peaceful retirement, or is it a strategic change of battlefield to a global industry food supply that is becoming as critically important and as poorly digitized as e-commerce was 3 decades ago? It's a provocative question to consider as he enters this new phase of conditional influence.
Welcome to the debate.
For more than 2 decades, Jack Ma's career was really the story of China's economic explosion. He took Alibaba from, an idea in an apartment to a global giant.
Exactly. But since late 2020, we've seen this profound shift, a very public retreat from corporate life, and a new focus on education, philanthropy, and surprisingly, agricultural research. And this all happened right as Beijing launched a huge regulatory crackdown on its tech sector.
Right. Which brings us to our central question. Is this pivot by Ma, is it a genuine personal choice, a new chapter he's wanted for a long time? Or was it purely a strategic necessity, basically a course correction forced on him by intense government pressure?
And that's where we differ. I'll be arguing that while the political climate definitely complicated things, Ma's actions really do reflect a long-standing personal commitment to this kind of work. It was a proactive desire to step back that he'd been planning for years.
And I'm going to argue that the evidence, specifically the timing and the sheer speed of his corporate dismantling, points overwhelmingly to an externally dictated strategy, a move he had to make for political and, frankly, financial survival.
Okay, so let's begin by establishing the long game here. My position is really founded on the evidence that shows Ma was talking about retirement very explicitly long before the regulatory storm of 2020. I mean, consider this. He announced his intention to step down as executive chairman in September 2018. That's nearly 2 full years before the Ant Group IPO was halted.
Not a knee-jerk reaction. And it wasn't just talk. His philanthropic work was already substantive. He'd co-founded the Jack Ma Foundation, which is dedicated to education, the environment, public health. He was a trustee for the Nature Conservancy in China way back in 2009. He even stepped down as Alibaba's CEO in 2013, partly to free up his time for this kind of societal work. So his recent focus, like being a visiting professor at Tokyo College researching sustainable agriculture, it just feels like the next logical step in a journey he started a long, long time ago.
I think that evidence of longstanding interest is compelling, but I think it risks confusing a wish with the reality of its implementation. My position is that focusing on his prior statements ignores the undeniable force and really the speed of the state's reaction right after he made those controversial comments. The rapid dismantling of his corporate control is, for me, the proof that this pivot was externally dictated, not voluntarily realized.
Okay.
The key timeline really starts in October 2020. Ma gives that infamous speech in Shanghai. He calls state banks pawn shops. He criticizes the Basel Accords as a club for the elderly. And then, days later, the hammer drops. The $37 billion Ant Group IPO, the biggest ever, is halted. I mean, that's not a peaceful retirement. That is a forced retreat after a direct confrontation with state power. And the most definitive evidence came later. In January 2023, Ant Group restructures and Ma's voting rights are just decimated. They go from over 50% to just 6%.
Right.
The company itself says this is to ensure no single shareholder has a controlling stake. When you lose that much control of your flagship company, that isn't some philosophical shift. That is state intervention. And this extends to his movements. He only came back to China in March 2023 after being, by all reports, persuaded to return by the premier after spending a lot of time in Tokyo.
Which brings us to the significance of that timing and his public disappearance.
It's just incredibly difficult to separate the two timelines. I mean, yes, he announced an intention to retire years prior, but the acceleration in the severity of his actual retreat, stepping down from the Alibaba board in October 2020, and then just vanishing from public view, it all coincides precisely with the state actively killing his biggest business interest. It is so hard to see that as anything other than, a high-stakes self-preservation tactic, or maybe even outright coercion. The scrutiny didn't just slow him down, it silenced him, and it dismantled the very IPO that would have cemented his power.
I see why you draw that conclusion, I do. But let me offer a slightly different perspective, focusing on what the regulators were actually trying to achieve. The intervention was, from their point of view, largely focused on Ant Group's financial structure and the systemic risk it posed, not just Ma's criticism. We have to remember the context. Ant Group was getting about 90% of its revenue from financial services, lending, insurance, but it was regulated like a tech company. Regulators were genuinely concerned about its massive scale and the risk of a financial bubble.
Sure, but the timing.
Well, Ma's speech was just extraordinarily ill-timed. He wasn't just taking a swipe at local banks. He was mocking the Basel Accords, which are the bedrock of global banking stability. The government's reaction was about proving they control the financial system, which is essential to them. His silence afterwards, while dramatic, could have also been a calculated move to limit the damage among investors, among his own employees, who lost billions when that IPO stalled. There was huge internal pressure, not just external.
That argument feels like it minimizes the political will required to take down the country's biggest ever IPO. Systemic financial risk is often the most convenient public reason for exercising political control. The core issue for me is still the control he lost, which I think gets us to the shift in corporate power.
Well, proponents of my view would point out that he willingly divested that control to focus on these other pursuits, like his academic work. And there are reports suggesting he still had a lot of agency. The Wall Street Journal reported that in early 2023, Ma was the one who actually orchestrated the breakup of Alibaba into 6 separate firms, and he did it while he was traveling overseas. That speaks to a pretty profound level of operational influence. He was shaping the final form of his own empire, which suggests he was negotiating his retreat, not just being pushed out.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy the negotiation argument. The fact that he was restructuring the pieces doesn't change the fact that the state had already cut the head off the snake. The reduction of his voting rights in Ant Group from over 50% down to 6%. That's the definitive evidence. Power was stripped, not voluntarily given away. I mean, no genuine self-directed retirement involves an earthquake like that. And the government praised that change, framing it as an improvement in corporate governance. That signals state objectives being fulfilled, not Ma's. And you mentioned his public appearances. Look at his appearance in February 2025 with Xi Jinping. His image was on the main state-run news program, a very controlled signal of approval. But the official news agency pointedly left out his name. He's allowed to exist as a quiet, compliant image, but not as an independent voice. He's operating within very strict political constraints.
Okay, but if this transition is entirely dictated by the state, why is his new focus so specific and intellectually rigorous? Why not just retire quietly to a golf course? Which brings us to interpreting this new focus on education, agriculture.
Well, you have to compare it to his past rhetoric. It's a jarring difference. Ma was the guy who got international criticism for defending the 90-96 work system, 9 to 9, 6 days a week. He glorified that intense corporate culture. And he advocated for using big data and AI to implement parts of a planned economy. I mean, this was a man committed to a very aggressive, centralized business ideology.
Right.
His sudden shift to being an academic focused on sustainable agriculture is, well, if you're cynical, it's a calculated deployment of soft power. It's non-controversial, it aligns perfectly with government priorities like food security, and it gives him a safe, apolitical public identity. It's an intellectual safe harbor.
That's an interesting analysis, but I'd frame his intellectual path a bit differently. I don't see his shift to agriculture as just a retreat to a safe harbor. I actually see it as a redirection of that same massive ambition toward a different kind of societal engineering. Ma's past comments, even the aggressive ones, they always showed an interest in large-scale transformation. He predicted AI would lead to 3-day work weeks. His philanthropy was focused on what he called sustainable money, wealth that's good for society. The current focus on agriculture and food tech is incredibly complex, it's long-term, and it requires sophisticated tech and logistics, which are his core strengths. I mean, he started the Huyupan School back in 2015 to tackle these big societal challenges. So his post-business life really feels like a genuine application of his skills to problems he'd already identified as important.
So we've established he had the intention to retire, but it seems the political establishment controlled the mechanism of that retirement. To summarize my view, it really boils down to the institutional dismantling that happened the moment he stepped out of line. The reduction of his ownership in Ant Group from 50% to 6% is not voluntary. That's a forced correction. That, plus the reports he had to be persuaded to return home, shows his pivot was a response to political pressure. It's a survival strategy, masked as intellectual freedom.
And while they absolutely concede that the timing was dramatically influenced by the regulatory climate, we can't just dismiss 2 decades of groundwork. From the Jack Ma Foundation to his 2018 announcement, the foundation for his current life was laid long before the political fight. His choice to focus on something as complex as sustainable agriculture suggests a genuine use of his new freedom, however circumscribed that freedom may be now. It aligns with a long-stated desire to create value beyond just commerce.
So the material really leaves us with a difficult synthesis. A man who wanted to retire, but whose retirement then became a political necessity.
Exactly. A necessity that perhaps allows him only the freedom to pursue politically non-threatening goals. The life of Jack Ma continues to present this complex picture where personal ambition and external forces are in constant tension. And we're left exploring that line where genuine personal choice ends and political necessity begins.